This is the disclaimer for Wildlife Control Consultant and Pest Geek Podcast for the Living the Wildlife podcast. Always follow national, state, provincial, and local laws when using pesticides and or other control methods to manage pests. Wildlife Control Consultant, LLC, Pest Geek Podcast, Living the Wildlife Podcast, Stephen M. Vantassel, or their or his affiliates are not responsible for followers' use of the information provided here. Hi everyone, Stephen Vantassel here, Wildlife Control Consultant, bringing you another episode of Living the Wildlife podcast as part of the Pest Geek podcast family. So hey, glad to have you along. So I'm a little under the gun because I've enrolled in a doctoral class. Don't think I'm going to try to finish the degree, but I'm in a doctoral class and it's kind of kicking my butt a little bit in terms of the time that it requires to do it. So, but nevertheless, I'm trying to get this podcast out because Franklin tells me I don't have enough in the kitties. So I'm basically down to 1 week at a time now. So I've got to hit the stick and get some more podcasts out as I'm trying to finish this course. Thankfully, it'll be done in mid-May, so I'm looking forward to that. So, but enough about me. Just a couple of another initial announcements, I guess, that we need to kind of get out of the way. So we'd love to hear from you if you have comments or criticisms of the program. You can certainly reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. That's wildlifecontrolconsultant, no S in the end, @gmail.com. Would love to hear your comments, suggestions, thoughts about how to make the show better and to serve you out in the field doing the great work that you need to do. So this week, I wanted to talk a little about how not to lie to your clients. And so I know this is sort of a controversial issue within the industry. A lot of, I don't have any statistics on this, but I suspect a lot of wildlife control operators and PCOs kind of, let's just say, are a little looser with the truth with their clients than other people are with their clients. And they do this for various reasons. Sometimes it's just to avoid an awkward conversation. They don't want to get into a fight. They're trying to get to the next job. And I certainly understand there's a lot of pressure in this business. Time is money, and you're trying to get out the door without having a client screaming at you for whatever. And sometimes people will lie to clients simply to try to get the job. And I obviously, I think those are improper reasons to do that. And I want to give you some strategies because there's frankly a lot of confusion about what a lie actually is. I mean, you might have been, those of you who are old enough, remember back during the Iraq War, Bush lied, people died. And so there's a lot of this sort of idea that people confuse what a lie actually is, and so they sort of politicize it, and they have a very low understanding of what a lie actually is. So why don't we talk about what exactly is a lie? A lie is either by affirmation or denial, the attempt to deceive someone into believing something that you do not personally believe to be true. So let's kind of go over that again. So it's the intentional desire to mislead someone, whether by affirmation or by denial, to believe something that you do not believe to be true. Now that's kind of a complicated definition, but we have to have a little bit of complication because we want to distinguish a lie from a mistake. And this is an argument I had with a professor. He argued that Bush lied and people died in the Iraq War. Okay, well that's certainly a position that you can have. And so I asked him the question. I said, so what you're saying is that Bush actually knew for a fact that there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq and then went to war anyways. And he looked at me and I said, because if he made a mistake, then what you're saying is anytime a politician makes a mistake, then he's lying. And of course, I caught him in a corner on that one because that would affect political candidates that he liked. So the point is that a lot of times people do this in relationships. Your girlfriend or spouse or something will say, "You lied to me," when in fact you didn't lie, you made a mistake. Remember, in order for it to be a lie, you have to affirm something or deny something that you know is false. For example, if your spouse says, "Where are you going?" and you're telling them, "I am going to the garage," when in fact you're going to the bar, that would be a lie, right? Because you know where you're going. You're just not going to the garage, right? That would be a lie. Or, "Did you pick that up?" "Yes, I did," and you know full well that you didn't. So we want to make sure when we talk about lying that we're distinguishing between a mistake, an error. Maybe you misspoke, you forgot, you misquoted something. Memories can be fragile at times, and you say the opposite. That would be a lie. But simply being a mistake is not a lie. That's a mistake. Now, there are people, I'm sure, who are going to try to manipulate this, and they're going to be mistaken a lot. Well, that tells you something right there, because sometimes we would call them, and when I was in EMS, emergency medical services, we would call that person as a poor historian. The old, when you get into a car accident, when you come up to a car accident and you're talking to the driver, were you drinking? "Well, I had a couple of beers." Well, those are the last two he remembered. Or perhaps 2 beers is what it took to put him over the edge, right? So make sure when we talk about lying, we're distinguishing between a lie, which is the intention to deceive, and a mistake. We also have to have the phrase intention, because if you're acting, the whole acting is entirely a lie, right? When you're acting, let's say you're doing a Shakespeare play, or you're doing maybe a Christmas pageant or something, acting is entirely not true, but you're not intending to deceive the audience. You're not trying to tell them, "Look, I'm King Lear," or something like that. That's just simply not what you're trying to do. So someone who's an actor on a stage in a movie or a play, they're not trying to deceive people, right? So we want to make sure when we have a definition of lying that we're distinguishing mistakes, and you have to have an intention to deceive. Okay? So understand that we want to avoid lying to clients, and I think we should do this for a couple of reasons. One, I think it's just wrong morally, but also it can come back to bite you. So people sometimes forget that if you're going to try to be in business for a long period of time, sooner or later those lies are going to be caught out, because it's very difficult to be a good liar. Because to be a good liar is you have to remember what the truth is, you have to remember what you lied, what you told a lie about, and you have to remember who you said it to. That's a lot of information to keep in your head at the same time. That's how a lot of people, when they're being interviewed by the police, get caught out, because it's very difficult to maintain a lie for an extended period of time, because you have to remember so many different things. It's so much easier just to believe the truth. However, I understand that there are a lot of people that don't like conflict. They don't want their clients yelling at them. I mean, that would be the more innocent way of lying. I would call it, in other words, you're just trying to avoid a problem, rather than a more manipulative type lying where you're trying to say, "Oh yeah, well, this animal dies instantly in the trap," which I hope if you're listening to my podcast, you know that I don't believe that, because it's not true, right? You know that conibears don't kill instantly, right? So that's just simply false. But people say it, but trappers say it all the time. And I'm sure many wildlife control operators say it all the time. It may be a lie that you need to sleep at night, that you try to convince yourself, but it's not true, right? So that would be a manipulative way of trying to convince your client that you're somehow humane. And I've had presentations on this whole humane thing, and I think that's a road that is a foolish road to go down. Okay, but that's not today's podcast. We're talking about lying here. So there are clearly people who are trying to avoid a conflict. Maybe a kid comes up to you. What are you going to do with that squirrel? And you know full well you're gonna whack it, right? You're gonna kill that squirrel. But you don't want the kid bawling all over the place and the mother's staring at you. And so what are you going to say in that particular moment? Well, I'm here to give you some strategies on how to avoid getting into some of these situations and maintain your integrity. Okay, and so that's something that you need to be thinking about. You want to be sure you're maintaining your integrity. All right, so the first thing I want you to think about, and that is when you're asked difficult questions at times that you don't want to answer, one of the strategies is to ignore the question. I would have, when I was in the field, I'd be working up on a roof or something, or on a ladder, maybe not so much a roof, but on the ladder, putting a squirrel trap up on the roof, and I'd have a neighbor yelling out, "What are you doing up there?" And I could just ignore him. You do not have to answer every single question you're asked. No law. Now, some situations it may be hard to ignore the question, to be sure, but sometimes you can use that. You can, when you're talking with a client and they have a question, you can just ignore the question and just keep talking, or you can ask the client a question and distract them. So there's different ways to ignore the question. You can just not respond at all. So you simply not answering something allows you not to be lying. You didn't say one way or the other. And that's contextual, so that may not work in every situation. If you're in a quiet room sitting at a table and the person stares at you and asks a question and you aren't able to have a distracting answer, then you're kind of stuck. Well, obviously it won't work in that situation, but you know full well in the dialogue when you're chatting up a client, or the client's chatting up you, and they ask you a question and you're having this give and take, sometimes you can just ignore it. That is certainly one strategy for you to think about. Another strategy for answering a question that's a very difficult question that you don't want to answer, and that is answer a question with a question. Let me illustrate that. Child comes up to you, an adult comes up to you and says, "What are you going to do with that squirrel?" You can simply look at them and say, "Do you really want to know?" That's a powerful question to ask. I've used that tactic multiple times. It is amazing how well it works. "Nope, I'm good." Now, I'd have a small minority of clients who want to know what I'm going to do with it. And in the state that I worked in, it was illegal to translocate wildlife. I could release it on property, but once I took that animal off your property, that animal had to be history. It's illegal. And so that gives me another strategy for you to avoid awkward questions, which often relate to the dispatching of animals. And that is, I printed out in my brochure that I handed to my clients, I had a little packet that I gave them. I think it was about 3 or 4 sheets. And I actually had a copy of a state advertisement or a document that said translocation. Well, it said relocation, but we know that's not accurate. We want the translocation of wildlife was not legal in the state of Massachusetts. It had the state agency seal on it and had their contact information, and this was the law. I think it even had the location where the regulation was. What that did was that allowed me to simply shift the blame. Even though I agreed with the law, Massachusetts had a lot of stupid wildlife laws, don't get me wrong, but that was certainly not one of them. And I could allow that to deflect any type of concern about what I was doing with that animal. So I was actually able to call out other companies because I'd occasionally have people say, well, the other company said they could release it. And I said, well, ma'am, I said, they either were lying to you or they were breaking the law, and I would hand them that document. So I was able to throw other companies under the bus, and I really enjoyed doing that because that is something that's just simply lacks professionalism. If nothing else, you should be following the law in your business. So even the stupid laws, you should be following. Because the only way to get rid of bad laws is to get angry enough about them to try to overturn them, or to hopefully have the government enforce them to get rid of these stupid laws. But it allowed me, by handing the client this document, allowed me to say, look, I'm just following the law. If you want me to release it, I can. The law allowed me to release it. I would have to release it on your property. And that forced them the client in a difficult position, and they often didn't want to deal with that. So now we have two strategies on how to deal with how to avoid lying. One of them is, of course, ignore the question. The other one is to answer the question with a question. So let me give you a third one. This is difficult, of course. You have a child come up to you and say, what are you going to do with that animal? And I'm going to strongly encourage you as professionals, never tell a child that you're going to kill an animal without their parental permission. I'm not telling you to lie to the child. That's certainly true, but I'm telling you, do not do that. It is not your responsibility to tell children what the facts of life are. Now, you may think, oh, I'm not talking about sex. No, but this is the fact of life that death occurs. Some parents are really hypersensitive about this. This is something that's not your responsibility. Now, do I disagree with those parents? Absolutely. I think those parents are silly. However, it's their child. It's not my child. It's their responsibility. It's not my responsibility to so-called wake the kid up. So what you do is you simply respond to them and say, well, ask your mother. It's not your job. Now, did you lie to the child? Nope. You didn't lie to the child at all. You simply told that child, you're not answering the question. You want the answer to that question, you ask your parent. That is certainly the most appropriate way of handling that particular issue when we're dealing with the subject of lying and you're asked this difficult question. And of course, the third way of answering a difficult question that often causes some of this lying, and that is simply to explain the issue in greater context. This takes time, so it's going to cost you money. It may be just easier. What are you going to do? Why are you going to kill that animal? I don't want you to kill that. You shouldn't kill that animal. And you say, oh, I'm not. I'm going to let it go. That's certainly a lot faster than saying, well, ma'am, let me explain why translocation is not as humane as you think it is. Now, that's a much more difficult conversation than simply lying to your client, oh, I'm going to let it go and it's going to be free in the woods and blah, 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 and all that kind of nonsense. Rather than having that difficult conversation where you're explaining what the humane consequences are of translocation of animals. That's going to cost you money. It's going to cost you time. But how long are you in your business for? You know, one of the challenges in this industry is that we tend to have very short time horizons. Next job, next job, next job, next job. I mean, I'm always amazed in this industry how many people can't plan their calendars. And I was in that situation, to be sure, but they can't ever register for a training course. I mean, I talk to people who are training, and they're like, and I said, well, how many people are signed up for this course? Well, it's still early. We're still a month out. And thinking that wildlife control operators can't plan their schedules a month out. And you know why that is. They do that because they don't know if a big job is going to come in or not. And if it's slow, they'll go. If it's not slow, they'll work. And I understand that financial pressure, but that's really a discipline issue. And so that time pressure is going to make you want to lie to your client rather than having the client understand the rationale as to why you're euthanizing that animal, even if it's not necessarily illegal to translocate in your state. Maybe you recognize that the animal is sick and the animal needs to be euthanized. So my bottom line here is I want you to be thinking about how you're going to respond to difficult questions, questions that put you in an awkward place. And I hope these strategies of ignore the question, answer the question with a question, appeal to authority, in other words, refer the situation to an authority. Those of you that are technicians can certainly say, well, you can call the office. Put that on your boss. Make sure your boss has a heads up. You do this before the situation arises. You should have a company policy on how you're answering these questions. And then lastly, you may have that fourth option of simply explaining in broader detail and in more context what people don't understand about nature. Because a lot of people think that translocation of wildlife is simply the humane thing to do, and they don't understand that it's much more complex than that. And part of our job in our industry is to help our clients understand. And if we're not doing it, who will? The animal rights people? Yeah, that's not going to work. That's not going to happen. This is one of the reasons why we lose legislative action, because we fail to educate our clients because we're only interested in that next dollar, not the long-term growth of our company. And so I hope that this little conversation, this isn't the most uplifting, this isn't going to be the most profitable vodcast that you've heard, to be sure. I'm just telling you that it's a bad idea to be lying to your clients. Avoid it like the plague. Sooner or later, you're going to get caught out with it. And you don't want to be in a situation where you're in a courtroom and all of a sudden the prosecuting attorney comes to you and is able to look at some of your previous clients, and he asks you the question, are you a liar? And you're like, no, I'm not a liar. And then he brings up your clients who said, oh yeah, he told me he was going to translocate that animal. He told me the animal would die instantly. He said he would be there when I had a problem with the wildlife, whatever the case may be. And all of a sudden your integrity's on. You can't unring the bell. Avoid it like the plague. And here's some strategies on how you can deal with those awkward situations, because you don't want to have a more negative taste in your client's mouth. Now, let me make one other side note here. One of the things that's been difficult for me to learn, and that is sometimes those of us with a particular understanding of ethics is that we think we have to say everything we know in order to be telling the truth. That's not true. Let me illustrate with an example. Your spouse or something comes up to you and said, does this dress make my butt look fat? Here's an example of where maybe the dress does make her butt look fat, but you know full well she doesn't want. Is she really asking you about whether this makes her butt look fat? What she's asking you is, how do you like the dress? She wants to think that you find her attractive. You can simply say, honey, love you, you're beautiful, I like the color. Again, those are distracting things. Maybe the dress does make her look fat, but her butt look fat. I don't know. But there are ways to sidestep so you're not answering the question that was actually being asked. It avoids, because you don't want to use the truth as a way to hurt people's feelings. Now, I'm not talking about feelings like the kids' feelings are going to be hurt because you're killing the animal. That's not what the kind of feeling I'm talking about. It's where you're just trying to hurt people's self-esteem. There's an old Jewish proverb. It comes from the Talmud, and it said, and the rabbis were arguing about the ethical question of how do you tell a bride she looks beautiful on her wedding day when she's not beautiful, when she's actually ugly? Now that's a very interesting question. It's just very similar. Does this make my butt look fat, right? So the rabbis decided that what the answer was is that no, every bride is beautiful on their wedding day. And so the point is that we don't want to use the truth as a way to injure people and make them feel bad. So when your kid comes up with a drawing and it's an ugly as hell, you don't tell the kid this is a piece of crap. Why? Because that's just a way of being mean to a person. He's trying to, and you're going to stifle his artistic creativity. So I tell you this not to give you reasons to lie to people. That's not the point. I think when you're in a business context, that's different. You're not having a long-standing relationship with people. They're not part of your family. But we want to be sure that you're known as a truthful person, and you know that there's certain situations when you need to have those hard conversations with your clients, and you need to have those situations where you need to have those hard conversations with your children, that you can tell them, hey, this, you may be quote unquote proud of your work in the yard, but I still see a pile of leaves. You have to have some wisdom in terms of how you're dealing with people, but you're not to use truth as a club to hurt people and try to destroy them with it. You want to use truth as a way of helping them become better. So tone matters. This would be more with your family rather than with your clients, but I don't want people to take away from this. I'm going to tell my girlfriend every time she looks ugly. That's a way to destroy relationships. But you don't want to be in the habit of just simply being, those people, everything is wonderful and they're always schmoozers, right? Where you can never quite tell, are they giving you a compliment or are they trying to manipulate you? That's a very, read the book of Proverbs. It'll talk about people like that. So again, I hope this gives you some strategies on how to deal with lying, and I want you to use this time as an opportunity to reflect on your business practices. And if this has been a problem for you in the past, I hope that you make a change and have a real vision on how you're going to respond to these questions for the future, so that you can be the type of integrity, have integrity in your company the way you should. All right. Well, I'm Stephen Vantassel, wildlife control consultant. Do take some time to subscribe to our podcast if you like what you heard. And we hope you drop me a line at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Love to hear from you, even the criticisms, suggestions for shows. If you want to be interviewed on the show, if you have a product or service that you'd like to get out there, love to hear from you, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. And remember, this is living the wildlife. Why do we want you to live the wildlife? Because we don't want you to be the wildlife. I'm Stephen Vantassel. Take care.